In the May of 1889, the murder of Dr. Patrick Cronin was the headline of almost every Chicago newspaper. As a prominent and respected physician, his death and involvement in an Irish secret society transfixed the Gilded Age of America. 7 members of the secret society, known as Clan were put on trial for the abduction and murder of Dr. Cronin. At the time, the jury selection for this trial was the largest and longest in U.S. history. The trial sparked controversy across the country, leading to protests against secret societies and criticism of the Catholic Church. But why was Dr. Cronin murdered? What was the secret society of Clan and why was this trial covered around the country? To find some answers, let's first look at who Dr. Cronin was. In 1846, Cronin immigrated from Ireland to the United States as only an infant. In St. Louis, he earned his medical degree and PhD and was known for his tenor singing voice. Cronin was described as a devout Catholic and performed at churches across St. Louis. As an Irish immigrant, Cronin was highly involved in Irish politics and joined the Clan while in St. Louis. His connections within the society brought him to work as a physician in the city of Chicago, where he became a leading member and a part of the anti-Triangle faction. Here's a portrait of Dr. Cronin taken from a newspaper after his death. Clan or the United Brotherhood to its members, was an Irish-American political society devoted to Ireland's independence from Britain. The society had over 10,000 members organized into chapters or camps across major cities, with Chicago being its headquarters. Some of these members even included Chicago politicians and a large sum of the police force. The society held meetings, initiation ceremonies, and fundraisers for their cause. Though little is known about their inner workings, a ritual book shows that they operated with a set hierarchy, including presidents, vice presidents, officers, and initiates sworn to secrecy. Here's an excerpt from that book detailing meeting agendas and their pledge to secrecy. In control of the Chicago chapter was Alexander Sullivan, Michael Boland, and Dennis Feely, otherwise known as the Triangle. Sullivan and the others used violent, direct methods against the British. This method was often referred to as the dynamite policy. This consisted of attacks on the public areas of London, including the 1885 bombing of the Tower of London. Though the bombings were unsuccessful, it resulted in the death of several members. The Clan leaders denied any involvement in the attacks and continued to request money from each of the camps. Cronin, in opposition of the Triangle's methods and a leader of the anti-Triangle faction, criticized the executive board and accused Sullivan of embezzling money for his own motives. In response, Sullivan then accused Cronin of treason and held a trial conducted by a panel of 5 men, one of them being Daniel Coughlin, a Chicago detective. Cronin was found guilty by the panel and expelled from Clan After the trial, allies of the Triangle went so far as to claim that Cronin was a British spy. Many members who supported Cronin chose to leave and create their own camps. Clan was now split, and criticism from Cronin continued. Here is author of Blood Run Greens explaining a little bit more about the rivalry between Cronin and Sullivan, and an odd prediction from Cronin himself.
Alpha was also involved in an Irish secret Republican society which was dedicated to freeing Ireland from Britain using force. And it was that element of his life that got him into trouble.
And much of the book deals with not just Dr. Patrick Cronin, the murder victim, and it's no surprise that there was a murder since you alluded to the funeral, and a person named Alexander Sullivan. And you say they were both involved in an Irish Republican group in Chicago. Tell us more about that group.
Well, Clan was established first in New York.
What's it called?
Clan which really means sort of the family of the Gael or the family of the Irish.
I see.
And it had been established in New York, but by 1881, its center was very firmly in Chicago, and Alexander Sullivan was the head of that organization. And I think Patrick Sullivan had some designs on that position, and the two men didn't see eye to eye, and Patrick Cronin accused Alexander Sullivan of embezzling funds from that organization.
And there was real tension between the two. In fact, tell me about a bizarre pamphlet that the murder victim wrote before he was killed.
Yeah, it's a completely peculiar pamphlet. Because of the allegations that Cronin had levelled against Sullivan, he'd been expelled from Clonagale. And so as a result of that, he wrote a bizarre pamphlet where he interviews himself. So he's both journalist and the interviewee. And in it, he says that he will be murdered and that his death will be greatly investigated.
Well, and as a matter of fact, he was right on both.
In the spring of 1889, Cronin reportedly told close friends that he feared for his life. That being said, it is uncertain as to why Cronin would later agree to attend and care for injured employees of Sullivan's ice business. This decision ultimately cost him his life. On the night of May 4th, 1889, Cronin received word that an employee was badly injured and needed immediate care. He was seen leaving his house in a white buggy and horse. He never returned home. Cronin's landlord and close friends noticed his disappearance and reported it to police. The Chicago Police Department assigned Detective Daniel Coughlin to investigate. Now, if you recognize this name, you may be onto something. Daniel Coughlin was a part of the same panel that found Cronin guilty of treason and expelled him from Clonagale. Now, Coughlin reported searching high and low, but found neither any evidence of Cronin or a possible crime. When Alexander Sullivan was questioned about the call, asking for help, he said that all his employees were well and did not need any assistance. A couple days later, a woman by the name of Annie Murphy reports that she saw Cronin in a streetcar around 9 p.m. on the night of May 4th. Following that report, Charles T. Long told newspapers that Cronin was alive and well in Canada. Rumors spread like wildfire, some claiming that he is indeed a British spy fleeing from Chicago, that he was escaping punishment for performing an abortion, or even fleeing because of a romantic affair. All these rumors would soon be proven false on the night of May 22nd, 18 days after Cronin's initial disappearance. The Public Works Department of Lakeview, a neighborhood just north of the city, received multiple complaints of a jammed sewer and a horrid smell. When arriving at the scene, they found a corpse of a man that would later be revealed as Dr. Cronin. Cronin was found with only a bloody towel around his neck and an Agnus Dei, a Catholic medal depicting the Lamb of God. On his scalp were 5 wounds from a sharp object. Many thought the weapon to be an ice pick. Cronin's neck was also broken, and he seemed to be hit on his temple with the blunt instrument. The scene of the crime was soon identified as the cabin behind Sullivan's ice house. The cabin supposedly was being rented to Martin Burke, with furniture belonging to Patrick Cooney, a suspected enemy of Cronin. Bloodstains and broken furniture were found in the cabin, and Cooney fled from Chicago. Additionally, police identified the stable where the white horse and buggy had been rented, by none other than Daniel Coughlin. John Kruns, a friend of Coughlin's, was identified as the buggy's driver. A total of 7 men, including Sullivan, Coughlin, Kruns, and Burke, were arrested for the abduction and murder of Dr. Cronin. The coverage of this case was absolutely insane. The murder gained the same amount of attention as the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, and Cronin's funeral was about as large as Lincoln's as well. The crime was covered from Los Angeles to New York City. Newspapers called out the corruption within the Chicago Police Department and called for the Catholic Church to condemn the practices of Clonagale. With such a large press following, finding a jury may have been the toughest part of this trial. Over 1,100 men were interviewed for a 12-man jury, making it at the time the largest and longest jury selection in U.S. history. The trial lasted 7 weeks, with closing statements lasting 14 days and over 190 witnesses called to the stand. Many witnesses admitted their involvement in the Clan Miguel, a secret society that was not so secret anymore. The defense tried to paint Cronin as a violent, radical British spy. But after 70 hours of deliberation, the jury found Sullivan, Burke, and Coughlin guilty of first-degree murder and Cronin guilty of manslaughter. Cronin later appealed and was granted a new trial. He was acquitted. Coughlin also appealed on the basis that some of the jurors held prejudice against him. He was also acquitted, but many suspect that this was the result of bribery. At the time, this trial was considered the crime of the century. But why? Well, for one, the trial was a press frenzy. Newspapers unearthed the secrets of Clan Miguel and painted them as a murderous group. Many newspapers reinforced Irish-American prejudice, some even depicting them as apes. The public also turned their attention to the Catholic Church. And Archbishop Patrick Freeman was under the pressure of the public, the rest of the church, and supporters of Cronin to condemn Clan Miguel, its leaders, and murderous plots. Like the church, the Chicago Police Department faced heavy criticism. Many of its police force were members of Clan Miguel, including Daniel Coughlin. After Daniel Coughlin's appeal, many Chicagoans claimed that he must have bribed the jury. The corruption within the police department caused outrage from the citizens, and they questioned the legitimacy of the trial itself.
Generate so many votes.
It was a mix of two things.
And we have an illustration of it. There it is.
Yeah, that's Michigan Avenue, as it was then. And 40,000 people turned out, partly because of the notoriety of the murder and the circumstances. There weren't that many murders of men with ice picks at the time. Most murders were either domestic disputes or barroom brawls. And so this one was, a lot of people turned out who were anti-immigration, because this was Irishmen killing Irishmen, and proof that the Irish would never be fully integrated, never be anything other than hyphenated Americans.
So tell me about the murder trial. I mean, the details are too juicy to give away completely. But for example, we alluded to the long jury selection, but the trial itself took forever.
The trial took forever, partly because they couldn't find 12 men who didn't already have an opinion.
And it's men because only men served as jurors.
Only men served as jurors. So they interviewed, I think, 1,100 jurors, potential jurors, who all said, we know they're guilty. And so therefore were excluded
because
from...
the people who were put on trial were not Sullivan, the person who was, but supporters of his. No,
then one of the people who was put on trial was the chief detective who had been put in charge of finding the missing man. And so that really generated a huge amount of interest.
In fact, at one point, people were pushing for no Irish person to be connected with the investigation. But tell me about the media, the role of the media in this case.
Oh, the media lapped this up because it kind of had everything you could possibly want. If you want to sell newspapers, a naked body found in a sewer as a result of a conspiracy for murder is absolutely what you're looking for. And illustrators found this story completely compelling.
Why was it so compelling around the world? Because you're right that it received global attention.
It really did. It received global attention apart from Ireland, because it wasn't a great story for Ireland, where you've got Irishmen killing Irishmen in America. But across
That's
Britain,
not news in Ireland.
It's not news, but also not good news in Ireland.
I see.
And so it didn't get a huge amount of attention there, but it did in New Zealand and Australia, anywhere where there was sort of a substantial Irish community.
And so, what was the impact of this trial and all the scandal that it evoked?
Well, it had local impact in the sense that the police force was rejigged entirely, because they sacked about 12 members of the force who were found to have been involved, and they rejigged all the districts and sent the Irish police all over the city rather than cluster them together. It had a huge impact on Irish republicanism because it meant that people who had been funding active Irish republicanism stopped doing so. And so money being sent back for the cause, as they called it, stopped happening until early into the 20th century.
And the following year, there was no St. Patrick's Day parade.
No, but there was this year, so it's all well.
Thousands of people from the city of Chicago held protests against secret societies like Clan na Gael. By the time the trial and coverage was over, Clan na Gael barely functioned as a secret society, but instead as an Irish heritage group that is still active today.